Well, good afternoon. I think we are right on time. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for attending. I'm Inaki Alday, Dean of the Tulane School of Architecture, and I will be moderating this panel of Tulane experts on climate change. Disclaimer, I'm, as I said, an architect, so I'm not very good at talking, I just draw. And I'm Spaniard, so I even talk worse. So thank you again for attending. And the topic is a really urgent topic and a very important topic for Tulane and for New Orleans. And we have here some of the national and world experts in the matter. We know that here we are in the forefront of climate change. We are in the arguably one of the most vulnerable places in the country, or probably in the world. The deltas are the richest and most vulnerable places in the world, and we are in one of the big deltas and one of the most vulnerable, with other like the Mekong Delta in Vietnam, or other deltas like the Netherlands in Europe. So climate change is in the forefront from us. And climate change and the social impact of climate change is one of the most relevant issues that we can tackle today for today and for the future. It's a matter of equality. We know that the people most vulnerable are the most affected by climate change and climate events, and the ones who are less capacity to recover is also not only the present, is the future of your children and my children, actually. Is in the line, and we definitely need new ways of thinking and doing if we want to continue in this planet. We have, each of us here are deeply committed personally in the work of climate change, but also we are deeply committed in a larger impact of the education of the next generations that are going to have the real impact on how we are going to inhabit this planet differently. So I would like to introduce this extraordinary panel of Tulane experts. As I said, some of the world experts in the matter. In my left, John Sabo is the director of the ByWater Institute here at Tulane, having worked in issues of environment and the built environment for decades now, with enormous impact. Next, Nishad Kapadia, Associate Professor of Business and Different Perspective on Climate Change. Nishad is going to teach next semester a climate change class at the business school. And last but not least, Dr. Jesse Keenan, Faculty of School of Architecture, Favrot, Associate Professor of Real Estate at the School of Architecture, and arguably the country expert in real estate and climate change. I want to apologize for Margarita Jube, who was also announced in this panel. Margarita Jube is faculty of the School of Architecture as well. She's now in Delft giving a lecture on related issues. I'm just going to make a pitch for Tulane. As you all have heard, that we are going often to the Netherlands to learn how to live with water. I have to say that the Dutch came here to New Orleans to learn how to live with water 100 years ago, because we were the most advanced place in dealing with water. We have got a little bit obsolete, so now we are catching up. But again, it's an exchange of knowledge, as you see in this coming back and forth. Actually, Dr. Keenan has one of his several degrees is from Delft University, one of the most important schools of architecture and universities. So I would start by maybe framing the conversation about what is the impact of how climate change affects people, and what is the social impact of climate change. Climate change is not an abstraction. It's hitting personally, socially, our people around. So I'll open the floor to how you see the impact, the social impact of climate change.
Hi there, John Sabo, Director of ByWater Institute. One of the things that we've been thinking a lot about at the ByWater Institute is the impact of climate change and how much water is at the middle of that. ByWater Institute focuses on research topics on climate, the environment, and in particular, water as a focus. And this year, the UN is holding a World Water Day conference on March 22nd, and the theme goes something like this: almost a quarter, more than 20% of the planet lacks access to clean drinking water and sanitation. Over 80% of the disasters are water related, and both of those things are exacerbated by climate change, especially the disasters piece. And both of those things are subjects that we do research on here at Tulane, and that is core to the ByWater's mission.
Yeah, I'll add an addendum to that, and which I think it's worth reflecting that we now have empirical evidence, observed evidence that climate and its impacts, not all impacts that are environmental and necessarily attributable informally in attribution science to climate change, but many from which we do have attribution relate to economy, right? They make to everything from 401ks and the performance of certain portfolios, public stocks, which you're going to highlight for us, to food, right? To the cost of housing. Our consumption is unsustainable, at least in the global north, at least in the United States, however we look at it from a carbon point of view. And we're paying the costs for that. Those are externalities in economic terms, right? And we've long shed those externalities to all around the world. China for manufacturing, right? We've shed all of our carbon and manufacturing to China. But the price is coming due. And the price is coming due in nearly every facet of our consumption, from how we live, where we live, the way we dress, clothes. There's a whole body of work out there on retail consumption and the impact of not only the supply chain of retail consumption, but the fact that we don't need nearly as many winter clothes anymore. So you can go through so many aspects of our life, the quality of our life, our way of living, and climate is shaping that. And for us, what's really important and what really brings us here today is about education, because every single job that you can think of in the economy, services side, manufacturing, whatever, it is shaped by the constraint of resources, ultimately in the end of the day. And people have to learn how to do things differently in terms of adaptation. So there isn't a degree program here. You can take anthropology and fitness, environment and resources. You can take finance, which we'll hear a lot about. You can take architecture, design, engineering, and there's new liabilities, there's new standards of practice, there's new things where the economy in general is pushing us in a certain direction, whether we want to go for it or not. And it's not necessarily about it's the old economy and the new economy, it's the entire economy. And I think one of our major goals is to make sure that our degree programs, our curriculum is contemporary with those demands in the future, because it's not what you learn in school, it's how you learn to learn in the future. So I think that there is very limited boundaries from which we can explore not just the impact, but how that impact shapes our underlying curriculum. Maybe fill us in on the business side, because that's where I was leading up on the economy.
So actually, I have two responses to what you were saying. The first is in terms of the social impact, right? And I think if we can look at this through an equity lens as well, when you have something like climate change, if you have resources, you will be able as an individual or as a country to mitigate or to react to it, right? But the people who are going to be most impacted are the people without resources, right? When you have higher energy costs, for example, it's the people for whom energy is a large fraction of their expense. They are the people who are going to be impacted, right? So if you have to migrate because of flooding, it's the people who, for whom costs of buying a new house are really, really onerous. They are the people who are going to be impacted, right? So there is a social impact, and it will be the largest proportionally on the most marginal communities. So I just wanted to highlight that in terms of social impact. And in terms of what you ended with, Jesse, which was how is the business school thinking about education and so on? Should we move on to that? Is that
yes, please.
So this is something that we at the business school have started thinking about in the last few years. We have an energy institute that is doing work on sustainable energy and renewables and all of that. But this year, we are also redoing our MBA curriculum. And as part of this recasting of the MBA curriculum, one of the 4 concentrations we have now is ESG, which is the environment, society, and governance. And of course, climate change is the big part of ESG. So we have a whole bunch of new classes. I'm going to teach a class on climate change and ESG and financial markets, and how these things impact financial markets. We have new courses on disclosure, on reporting, and so on. But I just wanted to add to what Jesse was saying, which is that what we've seen is a great amount of interest from our students, from businesses, from both sides of the picture, that we need students to be ready for this new world, where understanding the risks of climate and living in this world of climate change and managing and being a business leader in the world of climate change is really important.
Just to put a fine point on Jesse's point about curriculum, I think obviously y'all want to hear about curriculum. You have students here. I have a daughter who's 17 and applying to colleges. So if I were on the other side of this conversation, I would want to know that too. Having said that, I do what I do because I had research experience as an undergrad. And so, one of the things that we think a lot about at ByWater is research. And from the undergrad perspective, what does that look like? Could it look like, and it would be great to get comments from you later in the course of this conversation about this. It could look like 1 to 3 credit seminars about multidisciplinary research. It could look like actual hands-on research experience in a lab with one of the research projects that we've gotten funded through ByWater. Anything in between would count as well. But there are other ways, I think, to slice that onion in more creative ways. One of those that I've been thinking about is building small undergraduate teams to help do research on a particular environmental topic. Let's say the water crisis in Jackson, Mississippi, for example. Okay, go find out the next 50 cities that's going to happen in. That would be a research project. And then we take that content and turn it into publicly facing content, not in peer-reviewed research articles, but in places like Forbes, in places like a newsletter that ByWater publishes, on Twitter, on social media, and we source that from the undergrad. So I've only been here a year, and we just got done with our strategic plan, and this is part of our strategic plan, is trying to think outside of the box about the undergrad experience with research, and this is one of those ideas.
The role of the ByWater as a pan-university institute that is touching every one of our schools, and we are collaborating, faculty are collaborating, students are participating and collaborating, is a major infrastructure of the university to support and to collect the knowledge and the efforts and to put in direction. John is doing an extraordinary job in putting us aligned in coherent matters with great success already in such a short period of time in grants and impact. So we are so happy to have you here. It has been a very important addition. It's interesting that the way that multidisciplinarity plays in addressing climate change. One could argue that each of us have our set of knowledges, and that we should be constraining ourselves to that, how we can do from our knowledge. That is a kind of traditional disciplinary approach. Another way is shifting the focus from what each of us can do to actually which is the problem, which is the real problem. These are always complex problems that no discipline can deal with them alone. So the role of changing the way of looking at about what I can do to what is needed to be done. So what is the team? What is the set of expertise that have to collaborate together to address serious issues? And that's an important part of Tulane's way of thinking. And that's why John is here. My colleagues are here. You all have a multidisciplinary approach. I am in the fringes. I'm an architectural dean, but I am a strange architecture animal that does strange things as well, like flooding and buildings and spaces that flood. So really important, this multidisciplinary approach at the School of Architecture. We are real estate, preservation, design, architecture, building, landscape very quickly. So I want to maybe, if you can elaborate, maybe Jesse, about how this multidisciplinarity, or how are the many lenses in which these problems have been needs to be approached. You know?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I think that shapes not only Tulane's approach, but many universities. And it's a fundamental question. Can the university and the structures and institutions of the university keep up with the rate of change in the world? Not just climate change, but global change, artificial intelligence, aging society, inequality, all of these dimensions which are changing the world around us. Institutions of higher education really haven't changed much in 800 years. The disciplinarity, how we are rewarded by peer review publications, National Science Foundation grants, it creates specialization, right? All we're supposed to do is publish papers about stuff that most people will never read, and very few people really care about, except for a very small niche of people with inaccessible information. Yet we have all of these fundamental problems, applied problems and challenges from which we expect our students to address. So we are incentivized by a structure of specialization, yet we lack very often the general ability and real world expertise to engage. And multidisciplinarity is really just another way of saying, you know what, we're going to think about disciplinary and we're going to reward people and incentivize outcomes and learning outcomes in a very different way. And we're going to look at research and research production in a very way. It doesn't mean we're not going to necessarily have the same standard of peer review and very highly rigorous peer review at that for the production of our research, but we're going to have different expectations about what it is that we're taking on and in what terms of that knowledge making its way into the classroom. Because I'll tell you, at a lot of universities, there's a lot of knowledge production, very little of it actually makes it in the classroom. Most senior professors, the most accomplished professors, they don't actually really care that much about teaching. But I think what makes unique about Tulane is Tulane, first and foremost, is a undergraduate school, I would argue. I mean, we have great graduate programs. I don't want to discount that all. But our core focus is on teaching. And I think we have a new set of expectations about breaking down those disciplinary barriers and saying, okay, at the end of the day, what are we going to produce? What's the knowledge that's going to not just drive utility, but meaning in the production of people's lives, that they can come away with an undergraduate experience as well as a graduate experience and do something that addresses what are critical challenges to the future of our planet.
Can I just jump in?
Sure.
I just wanted to add a few things to what Jesse had said, and this whole thing of multidisciplinary approach, right? To give a very personal example, a few months ago, I reached out to Jesse and said, I'm teaching this new class on climate change. And Jesse is really the expert on climate change. Can you help? And sure enough, he wrote back immediately, sent me a bunch of resources, his class materials. We met up for coffee. He reviewed my syllabus. And this embodies this multidisciplinary approach, right? So he's doing it. He's not just talking about it. He's very much doing it. And I guess the other point I wanted to make was that at least within my field, right, within finance and business, climate change is now something that researchers are tackling. And when I was thinking about my course, if I look at the latest, journal, normally when I teach finance, I'm teaching research that was done, 20 years ago, right? And there is, obviously it's applied to events that happen today. But with climate change, it's research that is being published right now, right? That is going to make it into my class because that's where the knowledge is being created. So sort of getting this research into the classroom is super important. And climate change is one area where there is a lot of research across different areas as well, right? So I'm not an expert on the science of climate change, but we have experts on the science of climate change at Tulane. And I've reached out to some of them, and they have also been extremely supportive. And and we can slowly start building up this multidisciplinary approach.
Yeah, there's, I love everything that's been said. There's two issues, I think, when thinking about, and again, I'm going to put my research hat on because that's what I'm in charge of doing here at Tulane is growing research in this space. And I think there's two issues that are interrelated. One is multidisciplinarity. That word's been around for a long time. A lot of universities have been trying to do that for a long time. There's a lot of work to still be done about how a multidisciplinary team actually produces synthetic work that counts as synthetic rather than 4 people in different disciplines doing their own thing in parallel about the same question and then never putting that stuff together, right? There's still some work to be done there. That's certainly core to our mission at ByWater. There's another piece of this, which is a conundrum that I think all environmental science has faced for the last 2 decades. And it's that if you look at the distribution of the work, 80% of it is about the problems and 20% of it is about the solutions. And we need to invert that, right? And so one of the second missions at ByWater is to really take a proactive approach to research. What do we need to know in order to do stuff better, rather than what I call going to hell in a handbasket faster science, which is look at how bad we screwed up in the past, right? And that's not going to do us any good. The stuff that's going to do us good is figuring out what kinds of teams we need to build in order to make the world a better place to live, and to achieve some of the outcomes that Jesse and this panel has been talking about in general. So those are 2 things that I think are interrelated, but they're certainly different. And I think your children, our students, get that better than we did, right? The solutions piece. They want to be outside of the classroom applying knowledge right when they get here. And so that's another challenge for institutions of higher education, is to learn how to teach it that way. And I think research is one vehicle for that.
What do you think, or why do you think students that are, I don't know, interested in architecture or interested in business or interested in sciences should be interested in climate change?
So I guess the first thing is that we went through this exercise in the last year, trying to think about what we want our students to be prepared with, right? And one thing that came out very clear was that if you are going to be a business person, you're going to work for a company, you're going to start your own business, whatever you do, climate change is one of the most important factors that you're going to hit in some form or the other, right? You're going to come across it if you work for energy firms, for example, right? But not just in specific sectors, the impacts of climate change are going to be faced if you work for a bank, right? So for example, Citibank has come up with a whole list of targets on its lending portfolios on how much they want to reduce emissions of the companies they lend to, right? So if you work, I mean, a lot of companies now are producing these disclosures and ESG reports, right? So if you work in accounting, we were speaking to somebody who is a senior partner in one of the large accounting firms, and he is leading this practice on sustainability reporting, right? So across different dimensions, the business world of the future is going to have a component which is linked to the impact of climate. So that's why students who are interested in business need to be exposed to this new world that we are living in.
Yeah, and I think it is about skills development and a resolution of what those skills are that apply not just in the context of climatic change, but we're talking about risk and uncertainty, deep uncertainty, ignorance, ontological challenges with data. We're talking about a world which is moving in a certain measure of certainly quantitative complexity, from which climate is one component of that and one component of modeled application. But these skills have great deal of application broadly in the economy. It's just that we're stress testing this new technology, these new methodologies, these new techniques within this context of something that's quite rapid and profound. But it does have very immediate application for a wide variety of considerations.
I think relevant to this topic, and I always bring this up. How many of y'all have seen the short film called Shift Happens? Have any of you seen Shift Happens? It's not the other happens, it's Shift, right? Many versions of this, look it up online, it's fabulous. It's about globalization and kind of how the next generation will fare in a world that's changing in many dimensions, like Jesse said. And one of the things that really resonated with me, and it changed the way that I parent my daughters, is that the jobs of today are not the jobs of tomorrow. Your children are going to have many more jobs than we had in their lifetime, and many of them don't exist today. They will invent them along the way. And I think if I could add one thing to why should students care about climate, it's because there are going to be jobs in it that we don't even know about yet. And they'll be really good jobs because we're going to need it.
I'm sure before, I think we have to turn the micro to you, but maybe before that, I'm sure we all are curious to know more specifically, what are you teaching or working in specifically, personally?
Well, I'll say just coming here, coming in the past hour, working with the National Academy of Sciences studio, which is sponsoring a research project for our school where we're looking at the Gulf Coast, looking at changes in landscape form, engineering infrastructure, but also the industrial ecology. We have industries that are changing. We have tremendous capacity in offshore oil and gas. How do we transform those skills, those businesses, those enterprises into supporting offshore wind and PV and all of the infrastructure that we need? What does that look like? How do we think about the financing? How do we think about resilience engineering, a designed adaptive capacity? How do we think about this ecological dimension? And how do we think that its impact resonates in place and in places that we love, like New Orleans? So that's what I was doing just in the past hour. And that requires a lot of different expertise. And there's experimental and normative dimensions of this, right? This is part of it. And humanities plays a role. Science plays a role. There's a lot of, we don't all have to be MIT, right? There's a lot to draw upon. And a lot of this, frankly, has to do with communications, or even the communications of science, which are extreme. But the most important thing you learn as an undergrad is learning how to write. And if climate is something that stimulates that, and is something that allows us to communicate and to explore, then that is a pathway worthy of its own. But what we're doing, I think, I teach infrastructure finance, I teach advanced sustainable real estate design and engineering and finance systems where they converge. I teach climate change resilience and adaptation science. And for my students, they're coming from a lot of different perspectives fundamentally, and that enriches the classroom, because it's not just what I'm teaching. When you have a lot of different students who are coming from different degree programs, they actually, they may not have met. They're hearing other perspectives in the classroom, and we need more diversity of perspective in the classroom. We preach this all the time. So that's actually one of the major values, is bringing the students, because not necessarily what I'm teaching, it's what they bring to the classroom that I think really makes this a more enriching experience.
Just to complete this last hour of Jesse, just to explain, in architecture, in the School of Architecture, one of the methods of work, the design studio, is an iterative process of making questions and analyzing and finding solutions and realizing that is wrong and looking for another one and improving and improving. So this is the iterative method of design, and Jesse is coming from interacting with the design studio of the NAS, National Academy of Science Gulf Research Studio that we got an important grant a few months ago. So Jesse is from his perspective, with all his expertise, is also an extraordinary design critic that really helps the students of design to frame the questions in a much more comprehensive way. So that's for you to understand the last hour of dialectic of Jesse in this terrain.
So I guess to contrast with Jesse, I'm going to talk a little bit more about my background. So take a longer time scale instead of just the last hour, which I confess I wasn't doing anything related to climate change. But so my background has been doing research on financial markets, right? Trying to test theories of how individuals behave in the face of risk and uncertainty, right? So there are rational theories, and there are theories which talk about behavioral biases that we as individuals have. And the nice thing about financial markets is that they give us a lot of data in situations where it really matters, right? Where there's money at stake to test all of these theories of these behavioral biases and sort of rational theories of risk and return. So my research has traditionally been to look at the data and test these theories using, statistical models and programming to extract as much as I can from the data. So sort of to translate this into what this means for the panel, the class which I'm planning to teach is on the impact of climate change, which I think of as a very slow moving risk, right? It's a risk that's hitting us every day, but the impacts are fairly slow moving, right? The cumulative impact over 50 years is going to be huge, but the daily impact is small, right? So how do financial markets process these kinds of risks that are slow moving but big and very noisy, right? I mean, the weather every day is very noisy. The climate is something we'll see over decades, right? So how do financial markets process that? And the course that I'm planning to teach, the idea behind that course is to think through that question, right? What will happen in financial markets, or what could happen in financial markets over the next decade or 2 decades when we start seeing more and more of these impacts of climate risk? And to make this very abstract topic sort of more concrete, one of the things which I want my students to do is actually build a portfolio which will hedge the risk of climate change, which will do well when there is a lot of climate change. It could be by investing in new technologies that help mitigate climate change, and so on, right? So, and I think once students start thinking about something really concrete, that's when these abstract ideas start making more sense.
All right, so I can guarantee you that I didn't have nearly a tenth of the cool ideas that Jesse had in the last hour. And there's a reason for that. Is because I got off a plane from Thailand last night at 7 p.m. But that's a starting point for this story. The last 2 weeks I've been in Southeast Asia. I have a big research project in Southeast Asia on the Mekong River. The Mekong River has an inland fishery in Cambodia, which supplies 55% of the animal protein to 40 million people, critical for food security. And then if you think about the Delta, Vietnam, and Thailand together, they're the biggest exporter of rice in the world. Add to that Laos, Thailand, and sometimes Cambodia want to build dams on the main stem of the Mekong, which will impact both the Delta in terms of its freshwater and rice production, and also the fishery, because all those fish are migratory. But those dams, especially the main stem, are carbon free, right? So it's energy that seems green, but it has other costs. And so one of the big questions that we're asking is, how do we optimize the operations of existing infrastructure, dam infrastructure, to deliver food security to Cambodia and rice production to these global rice markets, because those two countries have an enormous impact on the cost and supply of rice globally. So super interesting project. And I can tell you that I got there because for ages I was working on salmon and dams in the Pacific Northwest. And I love to eat salmon. I love salmon. I love fly fishing, but that fishery is not important for food security. It's important for lifestyle. And I really wanted to go to a place where I could apply the knowledge that I had to a situation in which food was a critical component of the energy water system. And this is one of those places. So that's one of the topics that I work on. I certainly wasn't thinking about it over the last hour. I was thinking about taking a nap, but anyway, I'll stop there.
Thank you. We have still, I think, 20 minutes. So please, let's open this for questions from you all. Yes.
Repeat it. I can repeat the question. I heard it. Her question was, how are we going to convey this kind of information to the student body, to the general students? And I think we covered that very vaguely in this panel, but I think through courses and through research experience is how I would answer it. And I'll give you 2 examples of that, at least from my own experience, and then let my colleagues answer from their own experiences too, because they're very different. From the course perspective, I haven't taught a course at Tulane yet. I've been here for a year and I'm teaching for the first time in spring. And that course is going to be climate change in global rivers. And I'll bring in the Mekong example. I'll bring in examples from Pakistan and the Indus where I've worked, and also in the Amazon. And all those situations are different and need different disciplines to study them and have different solution sets. From the research point of view, I would think of it more as quality than quantity. Like the Global Rivers class will be taught through engineering, but I hope that it's a course of as many as possible, 100, maybe more students. And it's from all units across campus. That's the way I want to teach the course at the entry level. The research experience for undergrads is much more selective, I would say, and it's quality rather than quantity. So those experiences, if the students can get them, are an excellent way to A, see how multidisciplinary research is done, and B, see if you want to do it for a career.
I'll just add that the course offering is on a semester by semester basis expanding. It's actually pretty accessible. I think students who are interested in this work and recognize the value of these courses and the diversity of it are finding their way. I don't think we have any problem with enrollment or anything along those lines. But it begs, I think, a broader question is, are we preparing ourselves for a broader curricular push? Vanderbilt just launched an undergraduate degree in climate change. There are many programs. I mean, Columbia University now has the School of Climate Change. So I think we're in those early stages of discussion and thinking about how we can have more formal and more structured curriculum. But though it's moving, I think, moving in fairly satisfactory terms.
It's a discussion at the level of the deans, and I think Inaki would verify that. And so I think, yeah, look for developments over the next few years, and certainly I'll be in the middle of them.
Yeah.
Thank you. So I have a little bit of experience working with and supervising undergraduate versus graduate students, and I'm a huge proponent of undergraduate research. So I'm really happy to hear that, not just for the students, but for the consumers of the research. It's a very different animal, and you get different sort of benefits from it. Question I have is, New Orleans, it sounds like, and I'm from the upper Midwest, so this is all new to me. We're obviously in, from what you're saying, and I think just from like popular media, in one of the top 2 or 3 sort of dubious distinction, but like laboratories of what climate change can do, water related. So I'm just curious and my freshman is not necessarily interested in this field, but for what are the opportunities to sort of be out in New Orleans as a laboratory for this area? I mean, they're here in this place that's, right at the top. So I'm just curious. I assume there's lots, but maybe if you could speak to that.
Well, if you're building things and you're in the School of Architecture and the various programs we have, the site selection, the studios, it's very much grounded locally, and there's a huge opportunity to understand geography and place and culture and economy in real time. For other schools, I think we have case studies, and there's a lot of engagement externally, certainly through the public interest dimensions from which the school and the university and NTC has requirements. So sometimes it is what you make of it and your capacity to avail yourself of the curriculum, but certainly within the built environment and ByWater and certainly in the business school, there's a lot of opportunities that are actually local opportunities.
In our case, is like the most obvious because we build stuff. So we are probably in the School of Architecture the most visible. We have different design build programs that are addressing issues. We have the small Center for Collaborative Design that we typically build every year, one piece for a community. And of course, in these pieces, we are always factoring what are the issues of flooding, of water management, recycling of water, bioswales. The last design build was a kitchen for a nonprofit that was dealing with all the environmental impacts that we are having here. No? We have another program that is a miracle that does a house every year. Students design one semester and build the other semester. In this house, we use it to experiment with typologies to solve real issues. Now we are working with a nonprofit, the oldest African-American Lutheran church in the country. And we are changing zoning, we are changing regulations in the city. Thanks to our program, we have allowed the city allows for 4 units in a plot, which was not more than 2, and allows small contractors to do that. This goes in the direction of densification of the city that we really need for dealing with the challenge that we have. And of course, we are dealing with what means to inhabit here, how do you collect the water, how you manage the water inside your plot. Those are like very obvious examples because you can go and visit them, no? But definitely there's plenty of other cases, yes.
I think formally, the way I would answer that, and I'm new to Tulane, so I don't know exactly, I don't have this requirement memorized, but Tulane students have to do service learning. And I think service learning in the area of disaster relief would probably be the best exposure to living laboratory. I mean, I was here for 2 months before Ida hit, and I stayed for Ida because I wanted to see what it was like. And the biggest learning experience for me during that storm was it's not what happens during the storm, and it's what happens after.
And just to add one last bit, which is at the business school. I mean, as we said, we are doing this new curriculum for the MBAs. And an important part of that is what we're calling the impact capstone, which is where our students will go out and do projects in the community, which will have impact. I guess one ask from all of you is if any of you are working in the field of climate change in business, or if you are working at a nonprofit, if you have any projects for our students, please get in touch. Or if you have some experience that you'd like to share with our students, if you've been working in this field, again, please get in touch. We can have guest lectures. We'd love to get all of you involved as well.
Yeah, the fellow in the middle over here. Yeah, there we go. Okay.
Well, thank you for your presentations. Unfortunately, we live in a world where some folks don't believe in climate change, ESG, all that. And recently, some states are pulling their funds out of companies that are in this work. I'm curious how you inject the reality of politics into the classroom and prepare students to go out and change the world, but in the reality of the politics that everybody deals with every day.
One way that I've seen that tackled really nicely and on a variety of different topics, including this one, but also in an evolution class, creationism versus evolution. It's the same kind of concept, and it's a debate format where students have to play roles. And it obviously works better in a small class format. It obviously works better if you take a role that you don't believe in, because it gives you the other perspective, or if you change roles and you're forced to do debates in two ways. But debate is a great tool in the classroom, especially the small classroom setting for that.
I think another way, for me personally, I work at a very high level of the federal government and as a role as a public communicator. And I think I translate that day-to-day grind into the simplest lessons about trade-offs and the complexity of what looks clear may not be so clear to everyone else. The subjectivities that drive our interpretation, the biases we have, the motivations we have. There's a behavioral economic component of it. There's a irrational and rational component, but there's also the real politics. There's the cultural meaning component. And these are all the frictions that give vitality to life, but they're the frictions that resolve where we end up in the world, right or wrong. So I don't necessarily moralize it, but I think it's important to do two things. One, this is how it actually works. And that's where you can ground the scholarly knowledge with the practical knowledge. And the other dimension is how do you then communicate, drive consensus, and build a resolution given these constraints and these real world constraints. There's no point in teaching this stuff if you're not giving people the skills to understand how to drive consensus and collective action.
And just again, finally, to add to all of that, I'm planning out the syllabus for this new class that I'm teaching. And the first class is going to be exactly about that, right? Should businesses think about ESG or not? And we're going to have a healthy debate and we're going to think about it. And that's how we'll make some progress. So.
Yeah, because for some businesses, they probably shouldn't.
They should, yeah.
And we can talk about why that is, right? And so nothing is clear, nothing is easy. And that's what we embrace. And that's where we thrive, is where things aren't easy. Because if it was easy, guess what? There's just going to be bots teaching this stuff on YouTube.
I'm gonna chime in briefly just to explain an example. For several years, I have been co-directing a research project about the city of Delhi and the Yamuna, the river Yamuna, one of the most polluted urban rivers in the world, 100% fecal matter. The plans for the banks of the Yamuna, of this river, were leisure parks, Disneyland parks for reclaiming and reusing the banks of the river. When we started there, we began to do research and we began to understand what were the reasons for the water to be so dirty. The reasons were the city, not the water, of course. But it took a while to understand and to get the data and to map the many things that were never mapped in the city of Delhi, and then to look for a vision and for potential solutions. So I would say that each field has some different strategies and tools, but I am always an optimist about how taking things seriously, how taking things without judgment and with respect, and just stating the facts helps to change behavior. The result of this humble academic university project is that the planning of the city has changed. And what they were laughing at us, oh yeah, you want to do gardens? And you're going to solve this with gardens? You are stupid, no? Well, the plan now follows these main drivers of public space, restoring of ecologies, affordable housing, slow mobility, because many people do not have cars in Delhi. So this happens through a university and through the students' work, able to visualize the problems, to put them as a mirror, and to offer solutions. So I've never met with a Spanish cabinet minister, but I have met, I don't know how many times, with India capital cabinet ministers in a country that is like 20 times bigger. Why? Because this capacity, in our case, of visualizing a problem and visualizing potential solutions. So I would say that each field has different tools, different ways in which students are extremely powerful in able to change behavior in the largest, in the capital of the largest democracy in the world, in this case. So we are here because we are optimistic, basically. I think that's the baseline of educating. So
Tulane has a history of being and is kind of moving ever more forward in dynamic collaboration between departments. Given that, climate change is kind of an existential crisis, and we also have a crisis of anxiety for our young people, or all generations in this time, have you thought of doing cross-pollination of study, because we're right here in the thick of things, to do what are the effects of agency on volunteers and the young generation, and linking the School of Medicine, mental health, psychology with the effects of moving forward in architecture and doing beautiful things in the ByWater research, but pulling that together to then have a study that says, hey, the effects of mental health on these kids are so positive to go out and be agents of change.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I don't have a direct answer for it because it's not square in my wheelhouse, but I will tell you that there is a big push right now for research on the intersection between climate change and health, and one component of that is mental health. So we will be doing more and more research through ByWater on looking at climate change as, I mean, if you're in the medical field, as a novel comorbidity, and mental health is like, it's front and center in almost any question you might ask in that field.
We have a lot of, we teach health, human and public health in the context of the built environment. There's a lot of empirical attributes there that shape design and how we measure impact and performance. Mental health, the environmental design in particular, there's a tremendous amount of robustness in knowledge and practice there. So it's actually not to your specific research question, which I think is a very interesting one, but those connections are quite strong. I mean, I've had doctor to public health candidates that I advise, and there's a lot of cross-population historically in that context. Health is a good one because what matters more than anything in life, right? Health. And so it's the ultimate determinant of what we value. And so it connects with so many fields.
Our director of the small center for collaborative design at the School of Architecture is actually a public health person. You would say, what? Yeah. So definitely, I think we can never say we are doing enough, but definitely we are working in that direction.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're talking a lot about this right now. In fact, it came up today on the studio, specific to concrete production in Europe right now, and the extent to which, if you look at the amount of energy, intensive energies, energy intensive industries being shut down strategically in different parts of Europe right now because of the natural gas shortage. That's shaping the construction materials, it's shaping the housing supply. We also have a lot of import-export controls right now on minerals that are critical for infrastructure. We see certain key infrastructure projects actually slowing down because we can't get enough copper and other things that we can talk about. So it's something, I mean, it's energy. It's actually an energy story more than anything. And that's leading to a great deal. There's good and bad things. And I don't want to say good in the sense that opportunistic or exploitively good, but there are indirect implications associated with conversion to renewable that have some positive long-term impacts. But the bottom line is it's going to be a cold, cold winter. And the reverberations to the economy are going to be truly global. So it's something that finds its way in the classroom, I think, on a daily basis.
I think we may have time for a last question, or yeah, if there's any, and if not, I think we are actually over time. So thank you very much for attending this panel, and thank you.